Mom told me to cancel my wedding for my sister, but instead I did something else. Hey, weddings are supposed to be about love and happiness, right? Well, apparently not if you have a family like mine. What should have been one of the most exciting times of my life quickly turned into a ridiculous saga filled with guilt trips, jealousy, and unbelievable entitlement. Let me take you on this roller coaster of a story. I'm 30 years old, and for the past year, I've been planning my wedding to my amazing fiancé. We've been together for years, and after getting engaged last Christmas, we started organizing our big day. We picked a date in December, right in the middle of the holiday season, so we knew we had to book everything well in advance. We're not extravagant people, so our wedding plans were simple, just a beautiful ceremony followed by a cozy reception with about 50 of our closest family and friends. No over-the-top pre-wedding parties, no lavish expenses, just a meaningful day celebrating our love. Everything was going smoothly until my mom and older sister, Lisa, decided to make my wedding all about her. Here's some important backstory. Lisa, who's 33, was supposed to get married earlier this year, but her fiancé left her at the altar. It was a disaster. She had planned a small church wedding, invited a handful of people, and on the day of the ceremony, the groom just never showed up. We waited, we called, and in the end, he texted her saying he wasn't ready for marriage and disappeared from her life entirely. It was humiliating for her, and while I felt awful about it, I tried my best to be supportive. I didn't say, "I told you so," even though she had rushed into the engagement after knowing the guy for only a few months. After the disaster, Lisa was understandably heartbroken. She went through a rough period, blaming herself and isolating herself from most people, including me. I reached out, but she barely responded. When we finally met at our mom's house months later, she acted like nothing had happened and brushed off my concern, telling me she didn't need anyone's pity. I respected her space and carried on with my life. Then, a few months later, my fiancé and I finalized our wedding details and sent out invitations. That's when the real drama started. Lisa called me out of nowhere. At first, I thought she was finally calling to congratulate me, but the conversation took a weird turn. She casually asked where the wedding would be held, and when I told her, she just said cool and hung up. I found it odd but didn't think much of it. That same evening, my mom called, and suddenly everything made sense. Mom wasn't calling to talk about wedding details or share excitement, she was calling to tell me to cancel my wedding. Yes, you read that right. She said that Lisa was still emotionally fragile after being left at the altar and that my wedding would be too painful for her to witness. According to my mom, the only way to be a good sister was to either postpone my wedding for another year or drastically tone it down to a simple courthouse ceremony with minimal guests. I was speechless. We had been planning this for over a year, and my mom had known about our wedding date and plans from the very beginning. Now suddenly it was too soon and too hurtful. I tried to explain that we had already paid deposits for the venue, catering, and other arrangements, most of which were non-refundable. But instead of understanding, my mom doubled down. She said, if you could postpone it once for your fiancé's job, why can't you do it again for your sister's feelings? That's when I realized this wasn't about Lisa's heartbreak. This was about control. My sister couldn't stand the idea of me getting my happy ending when hers had been ripped away. And my mom? She had always favored Lisa, and now she was enabling her jealousy. I firmly told my mom that I wasn't canceling anything. The wedding was happening as planned, and if Lisa wasn't comfortable attending, she was free to stay home. Mom hung up on me. I was stunned. This wasn't just a ridiculous request, it was a demand. And I had a feeling things were about to get much, much worse. After my mom hung up on me, I sat there in disbelief. I knew she had always favored Lisa, but I never thought she'd go as far as trying to cancel my wedding just to cater to her feelings. I expected her to cool down and realize how unreasonable she was being. I was wrong. The next day, I woke up to an explosion of texts in the family group chat. My mom had gone on a full-on guilt trip campaign, telling everyone how I was being insensitive to Lisa's pain and how my selfishness was tearing the family apart. She conveniently left out the part where she demanded I cancel my wedding. Some relatives who clearly didn't know the full story started chiming in with passive-aggressive messages like, family should come first and maybe you should consider Lisa's feelings a little more. But the worst message came from Lisa herself. She personally messaged me saying she couldn't believe how heartless I was, that I was rubbing my happiness in her face, and that she wasn't sure she could even look at me anymore. Then she ended it with, "You've always been jealous of me, and now you're proving it." I was floored. Jealous? Of her? I had spent my entire life watching my mom cater to Lisa's every whim, always putting her first, always making excuses for her bad behavior. And now, because I refused to erase my own happiness to accommodate her failed relationship, I was the jealous one? I didn't respond. Instead, I decided to talk things over with my fiancé, who had been supportive through the whole thing. He was furious when I told him about the messages. He pointed out something I hadn't even considered. If the roles were reversed, if I had been the one left at the altar, Lisa wouldn't have canceled her wedding for me. She wouldn't have even considered it. And honestly, he was absolutely right. I decided that enough was enough. I called my mom, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she would be willing to have a rational conversation. But the second she picked up, she launched into another lecture about how Lisa was still grieving and how I needed to be more compassionate. I calmly asked her if Lisa would have done the same for me. She hesitated. She actually hesitated. That was all I needed to hear. I told her that I was done with this conversation, that my wedding was happening with or without them, and that if Lisa couldn't handle it, that was her problem. Then, for the first time in my life, I hung up on my mom. Within minutes, Lisa messaged me again, furious. Wow. So this is who you really are? A selfish brat? Fine. Don't expect me at your wedding. Don't expect me in your life. I sighed in relief. That was the best news I had gotten all week. But I should have known it wasn't over yet. Because Lisa and my mom weren't just going to let it go. They were about to take things way further than I ever expected. I thought Lisa's dramatic exit from my life would be the end of it, but I severely underestimated just how far she and my mom were willing to go. It wasn't enough for them to be mad, they wanted revenge. A few days after our last conversation, I started getting strange responses from some of my wedding guests. At first, it was little things, people asking if my wedding was still happening, others saying they weren't sure what to believe. Confused, I asked one of my cousins what was going on, and that's when I found out. Lisa and my mom had taken it a step further by actually calling and messaging my wedding guests, telling them the wedding had been canceled. They told people that my fiancé and I had decided to elope instead, that we had called off the ceremony, and that there was no need to make travel plans. Some guests thankfully checked in with me first. But others? They had already canceled their flights and hotel reservations. I was beyond furious. This wasn't just pettiness anymore, this was sabotage. My mother and sister were actively trying to destroy my wedding just because I refused to give in to their ridiculous demands. I immediately called my mom, demanding an explanation. She played dumb at first, acting like she had no idea what I was talking about. But when I pushed, she finally admitted it. She thought she was doing the right thing because Lisa needed more time to heal. She actually thought she was helping by trying to cancel my wedding behind my back. I was so angry I could barely speak. I told her that what she did was disgusting and that she had no right to interfere in my life like this. Then I made my decision. If my mother and Lisa wanted to act like they weren't part of my wedding, I would make sure it was official. That night, my fiancé and I sat down and went through our guest list. We formally uninvited my mom, Lisa, and every other relative who had taken their side. I didn't care about keeping the peace anymore. If they couldn't support me, they weren't welcome at my wedding. The next morning, I sent out a mass email to all of our guests, reconfirming that the wedding was still very much on and addressing the rumors directly. I made it clear that anyone who had been told otherwise had been misinformed, and if they had any doubts, they could reach out to me personally. Most of our guests were shocked, and some even called to apologize for believing the lies. A few family members who had taken Lisa's side tried to shame me for cutting out my mother, but I didn't care. If my mom could go behind my back to destroy my wedding, she had no place in it. But just when I thought I had taken control of the situation, Lisa proved once again that she wasn't done. Update. I thought I had seen it all, but Lisa's final stunt was so outlandish that even I couldn't believe she dared to pull it off. A week after I had uninvited her and my mom from the wedding, I got a call from our venue coordinator. She sounded confused and a little concerned. Hi, I just wanted to confirm, did you make any changes to your wedding date? We received a request to move your reservation. Immediately, my stomach dropped. I asked her who made the request, and sure enough, she told me it was Lisa. My sister had actually called my wedding venue and tried to change the date of my wedding behind my back. She claimed to be calling on my behalf, saying that we had a family emergency and needed to push the wedding back to an unspecified date. Thankfully, the venue didn't process anything without checking with me first, but I was absolutely stunned. Lisa wasn't just being petty anymore, she was actively trying to sabotage my wedding in every way possible. First, she tried to convince guests it was cancelled. Now, she was trying to literally change my wedding date without my knowledge. I immediately called her, fuming. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she had the nerve to act offended. She told me she was only trying to help because she knew I would regret going through with the wedding so soon. I had never been angrier in my life. I told her, in no uncertain terms, that she was done. That I never wanted to hear from her again. That she had crossed every possible line and she was officially out of my life. And for the first time in our lives, she had nothing to say back. I hung up and immediately called my mom just to see if she had any part in this. To my absolute lack of surprise, she did. My mom had encouraged Lisa to call the venue, believing it was for my own good. She even admitted that she had considered reaching out to my fiancé's family to talk some sense into him. That was it for me. If they wanted to make it clear that they had no respect for me, I would return the favor. I blocked both of them. No more calls, no more messages, no more family group chats. They were done. I had spent my entire life playing second fiddle to Lisa, watching my mom bend over backward to cater to her every whim. But this time, I was putting myself first. It was one of the hardest decisions I had ever made, but I refused to let them ruin the happiest day of my life. And when the wedding day finally arrived, it was absolutely perfect. But the fallout from my decision? That was something I wasn't quite prepared for. The wedding day arrived, and despite everything, it was absolutely perfect. No drama, no interruptions, just a beautiful ceremony filled with love, laughter, and the people who truly supported us. It was the happiest day of my life. But as expected, the fallout from my decision to cut off my mom and Lisa came crashing down almost immediately after. 2 days after the wedding, I woke up to dozens of missed calls and messages. It turned out that Lisa had taken to social media to air her grievances in the most dramatic way possible. She had written a long, tearful post about how I had betrayed my own family, how she had been excluded from my wedding because I couldn't handle sharing the spotlight, and how she had never felt so heartbroken and abandoned. She even attached an old childhood photo of us for extra effect, painting herself as the victim of some cruel injustice. Of course, my mom chimed in, adding comments about how she never thought her child could be so cold and how family is supposed to come first. At first, I was furious. But then, I laughed, because their over-the-top performance wasn't getting the reaction they expected. Instead of overwhelming support, the comment section was filled with people calling them out. Friends and extended family members who had been at the wedding defended me, pointing out that Lisa had tried to cancel my wedding and that my mom had backed her up. Some even called them out for their long history of favoritism, saying they weren't surprised it had come to this. Even neutral acquaintances were questioning why Lisa was acting like she had been the bride. Lisa, seeing that her pity party wasn't working, started backtracking. She tried replying to comments, saying it was all a misunderstanding and that she had just wanted to protect me from making a mistake. But the damage was already done. People saw through her. Then came the private messages. Lisa sent me a long, dramatic email, half apology, half guilt trip. She claimed she had acted out of love, that she had been so hurt watching me move on while she was still dealing with her heartbreak. She admitted to making mistakes but insisted that she never meant to hurt me. I didn't respond. I had nothing left to say. My mom also tried reaching out, saying she didn't want this to ruin the family forever. But I wasn't interested in patching things up with people who had so little respect for me to begin with. Lisa and my mom spent years treating me as an afterthought. This time, they were the ones left out. And honestly, I didn't feel bad about it. But just when I thought it was over, Lisa pulled one last desperate stunt, one that made it impossible for me to ignore her. Just when I thought Lisa had finally given up, she proved once again that she wasn't done causing chaos. This time, she didn't just try to guilt-trip me, she tried to turn my in-laws against me. A few days after her social media meltdown, my mother-in-law called me, sounding concerned. She asked if everything was okay between me and my family because Lisa had reached out to her. My heart dropped. Apparently, Lisa had sent a long email to my in-laws, painting herself as the heartbroken sister who had been unfairly cast aside. She claimed that I had been cruel and vindictive and that she had tried to make amends, but I had completely shut her out. She even suggested that my husband's family should talk some sense into me before I lost my entire family forever. I was absolutely livid. Not only had Lisa tried to manipulate my family, but now she was dragging my husband's family into her twisted drama? Thankfully, my in-laws aren't the type to blindly believe sob stories. My mother-in-law told me that while Lisa's email seemed dramatic, something about it felt off. She and my father-in-law had already heard plenty from my husband about Lisa's antics, so they weren't about to take her side. Instead, they called me to check in. That's when I knew I had to put an end to this once and for all. I forwarded Lisa's email to my parents, letting them know what she had done. I didn't add any commentary, just the email in its entirety. I wanted them to see, in Lisa's own words, just how far she was willing to go to play the victim. My dad, who had mostly stayed out of the drama, finally reached out to me. He admitted that he had been blind to Lisa's manipulation for years, but that this time she had crossed the line. He told me that after seeing the email, he confronted Lisa directly. According to him, Lisa completely lost it. She started screaming about how I had ruined her life and how everyone was turning against her. She claimed she was being punished for being the only one who actually cared about family. But for the first time ever, my dad didn't back down. He told her that she needed to accept responsibility for her actions and that I wasn't the problem, she was. Lisa, realizing that her manipulation wasn't working anymore, stormed out of my parents' house and stopped answering their calls. My mom, ever the enabler, tried to defend her at first, but even she had to admit that Lisa had taken things too far. After that, Lisa finally went silent. No more social media posts, no more messages, no more desperate attempts to get attention. It was as if she had finally realized she had burned every bridge she had left. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free from her. But I knew Lisa well enough to know that she wasn't the type to disappear quietly. And as much as I wanted to believe this was the end, I had a feeling she still had one last trick up her sleeve. Lisa's silence didn't last long. Just as I was finally starting to feel at peace, she made one last desperate attempt to regain control, and it was the most outrageous yet. One evening, about 2 weeks after the confrontation with my parents, I received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line? A formal apology. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, Lisa had finally come to her senses. But the second I opened it, I realized just how delusional she still was. Instead of a real apology, it was a list of conditions for reconciliation. That's right, Lisa had written an entire document detailing what I needed to do for her to forgive me and allow us to be sisters again. Her demands were beyond ridiculous. She wanted me to publicly acknowledge that I had been harsh and selfish. She expected me to apologize to her on social media for excluding her from my wedding. She even wanted me to tell our extended family that I had been too emotional and had overreacted. Oh, and the cherry on top? She said that once I made amends, she would consider letting me back into her life, but only if I showed consistent effort to repair our relationship. I didn't even bother responding. Instead, I forwarded the email to my dad just so he could see for himself that Lisa was still completely incapable of taking responsibility for anything. His response? I'm done with her. And just like that, the one person who had always let Lisa get away with everything had finally reached his breaking point. After that, Lisa must have realized she had lost every ounce of power she once had. The manipulation, the guilt trips, the sabotage, none of it worked anymore. She didn't try to reach out again. My mom, on the other hand, sent one last weak attempt at fixing things. She told me that family shouldn't be thrown away over a misunderstanding, and that Lisa was still my sister. But this time, I didn't even entertain the conversation. I had wasted too many years trying to maintain a relationship with people who only valued me when I was bending to their will. So I blocked Lisa and my mom for good. Update. It's been 6 months since I cut them off completely, and honestly, I've never felt lighter. My husband and I are building a happy, peaceful life together, surrounded by people who actually care about us. My dad and I still talk occasionally, but things are different. He's coming to terms with just how much he enabled Lisa over the years, and I think he regrets it. As for Lisa, last I heard, she's still trying to spin the narrative that I abandoned the family. But here's the thing, you can't abandon people who were never really there for you in the first place. So, to anyone dealing with toxic family members, you don't owe them your peace. Walk away when you need to. Protect your happiness. Because trust me, it's worth it. Hope you enjoyed this story as much as I do. Help this small channel grow by hitting that like button, subscribing, and sharing with your friends. Every bit of support means the world. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.